What's up guys, Sherry here. Now we're scraping this popcorn ceiling down and we're replacing it with an easy, cheap texture. And we're doing it right now, so let's get into it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to saturate the area with water. Now I'm using a spray bottle because I'm just doing a very small bathroom. If you're doing a large area, one of those weed sprayers is probably going to work best for you. Don't forget to lay something on the floor because this will make a mess. Once you get it all saturated, give it a few minutes to soak in. You may have to spray it more than once, but you will know as soon as you start scraping it. You can grab yourself a paint pan or a bucket so you can try to catch the bigger pieces. But guys, this should scrape off in big sheets. If it doesn't, then you need a little bit more water. And all I'm using to scrape this with is a putty knife. Now I started out with a small one and ended up with a 6-inch, but you use whichever one you feel comfortable with. I will also leave links in the description to all tools and materials that I use in this video. Now if you have some popcorn that is where the wall meets the ceiling, just grab yourself a sanding block. I'm just using a 100 grit sanding block and usually it will come right off. Now I'm not going to bore you with scraping the entire ceiling, but once you get done, it's going to look something about like this. I allowed it to dry, and now we're ready to mask everything off. And now you might be asking, Sherry, do we not need to sand this? No, you really don't. That's the beauty of texture. Unless you've got some really bad areas, there's no need to rework the mud or sand, because that is where the big mess comes from. Just make sure and remove any loose debris, and that's it. Now let's go make the texture. What I'm going to be using today is Proform. It's just a lightweight joint compound. Now you can use an all-purpose joint compound. Either one will work. Get yourself an empty bucket and you're going to need a drill and a paint stirrer. And all we're going to do is drop some mud down into our empty bucket. Now I'm not going to be making that much because I'm just doing a small room, but you can make as much as you need, or you can always just make more. However, if you're putting this texture in a bathroom and you decide to use these pre-mixed joint compounds, even though it says mold resistant, you may want to put a waterproof primer under your paint. And the reason being is because these pre-mixed joint compounds rely upon water evaporation to dry, but they are still subject to mold and mildew. Whereas the powdered formed mold resistant joint compound that you can get in the bag that you mix yourself relies upon chemicals to dry. So you use whichever one you feel comfortable with, and I'm going to leave links to both of these products in the description below. Now let's just add a little water to it. Mix it up good. But now there's no way I can tell you the ratio mud to water, but what I can do is show you the consistency, because all we're doing is thinning this mud. You want to make it almost like a pancake batter. You want it to be able to drip. You want it a little thick, but you still want it to drip. If you get it too thin, you can always just add a little bit more mud, but if it's too thick, just add a little bit more water. Now the next thing you're going to need is what is called a sea sponge. You can usually pick these up at your local hardware store or paint store, but I'm also going to leave a link in the description. Now all we're going to do is dip our sea sponge into our mixture. You kind of want to get quite a bit, but if you get too much, you can always blot it on the side of your bucket. I'm only blotting a few times and then I'm dipping it back into my mixture. Now you can put this as thick as you would like or as thin as you would like. You can put your blots close together or you can spread them out. It's really just a personal preference. Just make sure you can still see the ceiling because that's what's going to create your texture. But have some fun with it. Play around with it and practice with it. Now this is a good time to make sure you don't have it too thin. If you're putting this on the ceiling and it is just dripping and hitting the floor, then it's too thin and you need to put some more mud in it. Now I'm not saying it's not going to drip at all, because it's going to, and you might want to get yourself some glasses because you're going to get it on you. We just don't want it so thin that it's just a constant drip. And guys, what you're going to see after we do the next step is that this is going to end up looking almost like a California knockdown. And that is typically done with what's called a hopper gun and an air compressor. However, those can be a little pricey. So I'm just trying to show you a way that you can do this cheaper and it's a lot less mess. I'm also going to suggest that you just do this in small areas to begin with until you can get used to it. And the reason being is you don't want to let this dry completely all the way. You want to let each area dry anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And when this is wet, it's going to look something about like this. And don't worry about getting it on the wall. Guys, you can just clean it right up with water. Now once you have an area complete, let it dry, but you only want to let it dry until it's kind of gooey or gummy to the touch, which is usually just 10 or 15 minutes, give or take. Now, once this has dried and it's just still kind of gooey or gummy to the touch, you want to take your putty knife and you're just going to barely skim it across the ceiling. And you want to hit all the areas that you have hit with this texture. Now, you don't put a lot of force behind it, because if you do, you're going to kind of smear it in a big blob, and that's not what you want. But if this accidentally happens, you can take your putty knife and scrape it off as long as the mud is still wet. And then use your sponge, go back in, and blot that area. But of course, you're going to have to let that dry for 10 or 15 minutes and then skim it again. And once you have skimmed everything, it's going to look something about like this, depending on how thick or thin you put it on. And now it's ready to be painted. However, you need to let this dry. I let mine dry for at least a day, maybe even 2, because you really want this mud to set up before you paint it. And what I'm going to be using today is made by BEHR. It's just an interior ceiling paint. It has a flat sheen and it's ultra pure white. However, I had them tint it to a color called Polar Bear. Now this is the ultra pure white, and this is the Polar Bear. And as you can see, there's really not that much of a difference. You put this on the ceiling, it looks bright white. But the reason I do this is because ultra pure bright white will show any and all imperfections you have. Whereas if you tint it, it will not draw your eyes to the ceiling. And it's just a personal preference, and I prefer it. I could have even went darker with this, to be honest. Now when you're ready to paint this, I'm going to suggest you use a thick nap roller. I'm using a 3¼ inch thick nap roller. I'm going to start out with a paintbrush. I'm going to trim everything out and go around the edges, and then I'm just going to roll it on. And guys, this texture can also be done on walls and even paneling. But if you're doing paneling, you have to prep your paneling first. If you don't know how to do that, I've got a video on that. Click the card in the upper right-hand corner. I'll also leave links in the description. And don't forget to check out my merch store. It helps me keep making these videos for you guys. Link is in the description. Now here is our final result. Your ceiling should look or resemble something like this. Now, I hope this video helps, guys. If so, please smash that like button for me. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. But when you do, don't forget to click that little bell.
That way, when I upload new videos, you'll be the first to know. Now, this is Sherry saying you guys can easily do this. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in to What the Fox. Until next time, take care.